everyone. Hey, before we open today's letter, I want to update you on a few things happening here at GCC because there's a whole lot of things going on. First thing I want to mention is kind of around our Renew. You remember back in August, I laid out a 2020 vision for us, and the pledges for Renew actually continued to come through, enabling us to start some of those initiatives even earlier than what we had planned. So you were up to almost $900,000 now in commitments, which is fantastic. And the money towards those commitments continues to come in too. So it's enabling us to step into developing ethnic leaders here at GCC. So even having Pastor Andrew at Maryland, who just up here praying, working with our Burmese group these last couple of weeks, has been part of that. It's been fantastic. We're in dialogue right now with a local secondary school in our area, and the hope that we can have a couple of youth workers beginning within that school in February next year. We have our internships, Renew internships, beginning also early next year, the first round of those. Our young adult ministry continues to flourish. We have some plans there to have a whole bunch of different flats sprinkled around Auckland with young professionals and university students. And those flats have been turned into missionary labs versus the alternative. And so actually, if you have some flats that can take like 5 to 7 young adults, if you can chat to me or Brian afterwards, we'd love to hear from you. Obviously, these people can pay rent. That part's okay. But just having bigger places that can be stable for people to come around and think about how to change the neighborhood. I'm heading off to PNG next Wednesday for the graduation of the Bible College, which we're extending as part of Renew. And then the building on the side wing began this last Monday. So you'll see a whole bunch of fences out there, and the side wing will be worked on, be finished about June next year. Lots going on, and that's just part of it. It's a huge amount. Next year, a key word you'll hear me use a lot is the word deepen. It's kind of a key focus for next year, and I'll talk more about that kicking off the year, but we want to be a church that's not shallow. We want our roots to go down deep, for us to be grounded and ready for a greater harvest as we step out to renew people and renew places. So kicking off the very first Sunday of 2017, I know it seems a long way away, but it's not that long to go. Very first Sunday, 1st of January, we'll begin a series looking at the character of God, because we want to begin the year deepening our understanding of who God is and how that affects our walk with Him. And so while many people go away on holiday, things continue here and kind of strong beginning to the year as we look at who God is and what that means to us today. And finally, I want to update you on our finances, because there's always that kind of changes year by year as well, or month by month. And we're tracking pretty well with our offerings and our tithes. As you can see in the first slide here, pretty hard to budget on that because it's kind of up and down every single month, and you see the next couple of months to come. But we're tracking on pretty well. So the next slide kind of shows the bottom line, which some of you would be interested in. From our offerings, our budget year to date is the top figure, 1.211. Actual year to date, just under that. So it's kind of a difference of about 12 to 13,000, which I'd love to see kind of cleared and kind of swing the other way as it relates to our offerings. And what I love about GCC is that when we hear of a need, we step in and we meet that need. And so I kind of wanted you to be aware of that and see what can happen. So with that in mind, I'd like to pray as we open this next letter from Revelation 3 this morning. Jesus, thank you for what you're doing here in our church. Thank you for the new, fresh stories of people coming to know you, getting baptized, loving you, making a difference in their homes, their workplaces, their neighborhoods, the world that we live in. And Father, as we open this letter now, would you take hold of this time and this space to remind us of who you are and what it means for us. Give us hope. Give us peace today where we need it. In Jesus' name, amen. So far, we've opened 4 of these letters that Jesus wrote to believers then and now from Revelation chapter 2 and 3. Let's open this next one and hear what Jesus has to say to the church in Philadelphia.
To the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens no one can shut, and what he shuts no one can open. I know your deeds, See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have, so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I will write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
You know, each of these letters has reminded us, always begins with this reminder of who Jesus is and what's going on in the life of every believer. I love the way Jesus tailors what he writes to the specific traits of these cities. If it's a correction that's needed, he steps in and he corrects. If it's people short of hope, as it is right here in this letter in the Church of Philadelphia, Jesus provides promise after promise after promise. And my sense is that many of us here today are in need of hope, need of those promises, hearing what Jesus has to say about the various situations going on in our life. We need to anchor ourselves in what Jesus says right here in this letter to this church. So let's begin by reflecting on what's going on in the lives of people back then so we can find the connection points to what's happening in our lives today. Jesus says he begins, I know your deeds. I know what you do. I know what's going on. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Very first thing I think we need to know about the original recipients of this letter is they were a small but faithful group. The faith community was likely scattered and small, smaller than the other churches we've looked at from these other letters at this point. They had little influence in their city, but not because they were, inwardly looking and not outwardly looking. It's just they were just small, and they were looked down upon because of that. So we're going to see the area around here. It was probably very similar to Kaikoura. It was agriculturally prosperous, with soil ideal for growing grapes. Today, it's a Turkish town called Alesia, named after sultanas because of the grapes in the area. Like all the other cities of that time, the worship of other gods was a big part of what happened in this township. The patron deity of the city was appropriately Dionysus. Remember, Dionysus was the god of wine. We saw last week there was a temple in Pergamum. People would head off to this god Dionysus, and it would be effectively party central in the area. Dionysus is the god you worshipped for a really good time. He's the patron god of this particular city. But this little church has not compromised like some did over in Pergamum. It says they were faithful. Jesus says, you've kept my word. You've not denied my name. Jesus loves their faithfulness. It's something that he just loves. It's, they were faithful in word and deed. They were small, but they weren't small because they weren't looking at reaching out to others. Jesus commends them for the way they've hung in there. But all this has affected them deeply. It's been hard for them. They've been looked down upon. They were shaken. It's another trait of who they are. A major trait of this city is its earthquakes. The city was leveled in AD 17, and the continuing aftershocks that they experienced caused a whole bunch of the town to live outside of the city walls. The city walls were constantly cracked. The people lived in these insecure buildings and made plans often with earthquakes in mind. Like I said, this has some big similarities to Kaikoura. Perhaps I should kind of pause there for a minute, though, and add that earthquakes came to this area originally because, earthquakes happen. It didn't happen because of some specific judgment God had on the city at the time. It's just that the earth shakes, right? And I want to mention that because sometimes pastors get kind of off beam and say things that are not really helpful to people around them. Earthquakes happen at times, and not because of specific sin of the people in them. As a result of these shakes, the people themselves are shaken. And there's a longing that they have for the sense of permanence, the desire to live again in a city where things are not constantly cracked or in a state of repair. Tuck this truth away because it's going to come in very handy a little later in our letter. On top of all this, we see another trait of the city. They faced an identity crisis. The city had been named and renamed many times. Go to Wikipedia, it gives you a bit of the background of this. It was established in 189 BC by King Eumenes II of Pergamum. He named the city for the love of his brother, who would be his successor, and whose loyalty earned him the name Philadelphos, meaning literally the one who loves his brother. So Philadelphia, brotherly love. That's the first name that we have. It has a nice ring to it. But later on, the emperor Tiberius Caesar helped Philadelphia recover from that earthquake that they had experienced. So he said, as a township, you don't need to pay taxes for the next 5 years to help you get out of the mess that you're in. So out of gratitude, the town changed its name from Philadelphia to Neo Caesarea, meaning New Caesar, out of worship for Tiberius' adopted son Germanicus. Then not long after this letter was written, or not long before this letter was written, it changed its name to Flavia, the name of the imperial dynasty following the civil war of AD 69. 3 different names within 60 years. Philadelphia, Neo Caesarea, and Flavia. Talk about an identity crisis for this town. They also faced political and economic instability. Though they had enjoyed the emperor's tax-free status and they had honored him, ties to the city were beginning to be difficult between Rome and the city. It was fractious. In AD 92, Emperor Domitian demanded that half of the vines in this area be cut down and that they be ordered to grow grain for the military because there was a famine and the emperor wanted more grain for his military. Remember, this is wine country. Great soil for wine, not great soil for grain. And so the wine trade was this economy. They tried to grow grain, didn't grow. Vines take a long time to grow. It just kind of causes major economic upheaval in this whole area. The whole city, including the believers in this church, have all faced political and economic instability caused by Emperor Domitian. On top of all that, the Jews had slammed the door in their face. Many of these believers here in this church were Jewish in their ethnicity. Originally, they had been part of the synagogue, and even when they became believers, they no doubt continued to go to synagogue. After all, they were all about the promised Messiah. But the synagogue didn't see it that way, and they effectively slammed the door on these Christians. Suddenly, the people who have made life horrid for people in this church are the very people they would have thought they had a lot of affinity with, people that should at least understand what it feels like to be excluded, but it's the Jewish community that are causing harm on the believers in this church. As you can imagine, believers in this little church are shaken, vulnerable, unsettled, excluded. None of you would ever be feeling any of that, would you? I mean, if you do, this letter is pure encouragement for you. See, when you're walking with Jesus, and when you're trying to walk with Jesus, but having a really rough time doing so, this letter is pure hope. There's zero critique like there is in some of these other letters we've seen. There's no threat of Jesus removing the lampstand or coming with a sword in his mouth. This letter is full of promise after promise after promise. And I want you to think of 5 anchor points here in this letter for your soul today. It begins, first of all, with a reminder about Jesus. This is where we always need to begin, isn't it? Because we forget and we kind of focus on ourselves and we forget who Jesus is and the relationship that has to our circumstances. We need to remember who Jesus is in relation to our situation. Jesus says, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. Each of these letters begins with a description of Jesus and is always tied to the very context that the people are facing. So how does Jesus refer to himself in this letter? He says, First of all, he's holy, meaning set apart. And I think actually Jesus is trying to make a connection with the people here. You're set apart from the city. You're separated from them. You're holy. I'm coming to you also as the one who was set apart. Secondly, he is true. He is the authentic, true, real one. He isn't some sham God like the ones around you. He's the genuine article. He's also true in the sense that he's faithful. He's not some emperor that will promise you something and then strip your economy. No, he's true and he's faithful. And third, he's of the line of David. Very pointed, knowing the issues that the Christians here are facing as the Jewish synagogue slams the door in their face. And Jesus says, I know they think they're of the line of David, but I am the genuine one of David. And I'm about to include you. See, right from the beginning, there's affinity and there is acceptance. To what extent do you realize Jesus comes alongside of you right now with affinity and with acceptance? You know, sometimes church leaders and worship leaders stand up the front and they say things like crazy things like, forget what you're going through as you meet with God. Or as you come today, whatever's happened through this week, park it at the door as you come to worship. I hope that never happens here because it is so inauthentic. Jesus never asks us to do that. He never expects us to ignore what is happening in our lives. Never. In fact, he does the opposite. He knows exactly what we're going through. He wants us to bring that to him, even in the context of worship, because he is able to do something about it. He understands. He accepts. He invites. He comes alongside of us in every situation we're going through. There's another anchor point right here in this letter. Amidst the slammed doors around you, see the door Jesus has opened. Remember, here are the Jews who have slammed the door in their face and excluded them from the synagogue. And Jesus says, they're not a real synagogue. Don't worry about it. I'm the only one that can open and shut the door to heaven. He says, what he opens, no one can shut. What he shuts, no one can open. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. One of my favorite talks is from the great author C.S. Lewis, and he writes this essay that he delivered to university students one day called The Inner Ring. And he talks about how all of us have this desire to be included by another ring, and we get into that ring and we see another ring, and we're always trying to become part of that inner group, that gang, that set, that caucus, that inner ring. And we spend vast amounts of energy doing this throughout our life. So at school, we try all sorts of things to be in that cool group or that intelligent group or the party group. It happens at school. It happens in every industry, every neighborhood, everywhere. It's this endless desire to get in that next ring, that next group, that next ring, the inner ring, or through that next door. And Lewis says that desire can make a man who is not yet a very bad man do some very bad things. Because we will do whatever we need to do in order to be accepted and to be included. Of course, the irony is when you get into that ring, there's another ring. You work hard to become partner, then you find within that group there's another group and another group. You make it into that group and there's another group, and you always find that there's something else to try to get into. And that desire never seems to go away. We're tempted to do whatever we can to get into that inner ring. Let's change the metaphor for a moment and think about a door. We're always trying to get behind the door, aren't we? Because there's something behind the door. There's a group of people behind the door, and we want to be in their lounge. We want to be in their comfort. We want their company. And so it begins right at the beginning. We try to almost search for all these combinations or all these keys to try to get to the door in order to open it, because we want to be on the other side. Might be at school, and there's a cool group back there, and they're dressed in a particular way, and we want in. And so we try, and we're banging our head on the door in order to get in. And we try to get in, and then the door just kind of slams in our face. Continually, doesn't it? It might not dress a particular way, and the door's slammed in our face. We might not have the right labels, and again, the door is slammed in our face. We might not be from the right postal code or the right social circles or know the right people, and again, the door is continually slammed in our face throughout life. That's how it often is, isn't it? You don't speak the right language. You don't sound intelligent enough. You're single in a married world. You're shut out. Or you're married and you don't have kids, and again, the door's just slammed. Or you have kids, but you don't parent in a particular way or philosophy or style, and again, it's slammed. We all know what that's like. All of us. You know, at school, it might be a really big surprise to you, but I wasn't one of the cool kids. I was never on the other side of that door. Wanted to be, but I was even rejected at one time by the kind of the nerdy kids in our school. So that's pretty lonely. You know, you're trying to get in, and continually there's just a slam that happens. You know, I think that's also true in church circles. My theory is that churches are often built around a particular set of experiences with God or a particular set of spiritual gifts that are upheld really highly. And when people don't have those same experiences or those same gifts, we kind of shut the door on them, and they're not really as welcome. You know, I find this as a Christian leader at times. I can be in a particular circle, and if I don't have the right personality or if I don't have the right spiritual gifts of some kind, again, it's just a slam. You're excluded. You're not really welcome here among us. People might try to say that a little bit better. They don't just slam the door in your face, but you know when you're welcome and when you're not. And what C.S. Lewis says in this essay is that until you get to a stage where you're prepared to be an outsider, you will always be banging your head on whatever door it is, trying to get on the other side of that, and continually feeling excluded and lonely and shut out. But you see, what Jesus writes here in this letter is exactly what we need in order to fight all of that. Rather than having to search for keys and bang our head on the door, what Jesus says is, hey, I want you to know that I'm the one who knows what you're going through, first of all. You know, that they slammed the door on me. I didn't fit into the religious system. I was even excluded by everyone around so much that they killed me because they didn't want me around. But I rose and I conquered that, and now I stand before you with an open door. And I'm inviting you to come through the door that I have opened, the door that you actually need to come into. And the door that Jesus says is this door to his new city, to his life, to his kingdom. And he says it's wide open to everyone. It's open to you. You don't have to search for a set of keys or combination. It's just Jesus is the one who holds the door open. And he says, I want you to come in. I'm including you in my new community, in my life, in the future that I have for you. There's nothing you have to do. Just come through. It's wide open. And when you realize that he accepts you and he invites you, you can give up on trying to get into any other inner ring or inner group or whatever door it is, because Jesus has the door that you actually need entrance to, right? Full of promise, this letter, that we need to anchor ourselves in. There's another promise here that Jesus gives. He says, when others have hurt you, remember Jesus will vindicate you. He says, I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they're not, but are liars, strong words. I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. What does that mean? I mean, I thought these people were Jews. Does it mean that they're, claiming an ethnicity when they're not? The language reminds us of something we read elsewhere in the Bible, and in Romans chapter 2, where a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God. It's not a group of just, Jesus did this with the Jewish religious leaders. He looked at them and said, your father is the devil. Strong words. In the same way, this religious group has seriously hurt this group of believers here in Philadelphia. Remember, at the time, the Jews were the ones that had legal protection from having to worship the other gods. They were allowed to just worship in their synagogue. And in the early days, the Christians would enjoy the freedom of that as well. It's seen as a sect of Judaism. They didn't have to say Caesar is Lord. But the synagogue is doing everything it can to distance themselves from the Christians. As such, the Christians here have no legal protection. And it's likely that these Jews are becoming a snitch, dobbing the Christians in for worshiping Jesus, so they'll be found guilty of an illegal religion. Penalties range from corporal punishment to exile to to capital punishment. All this is from a group of people who should know what it's like to have the door slammed in their face. So you can imagine this small group of believers are hurting. They're publicly slandered, they're misunderstood, they're attacked. And then Jesus says to them, I will vindicate you. If you've ever been slandered, if you've ever been publicly shamed, if you've lost face, there is a deep desire to be understood, to have public recognition that you are innocent. And if that's where you are today, hear what Jesus says here to you. Leave it to me. There will be justice. Everything will one day be sorted out. They will acknowledge that I love you and that I stand beside you. When others have hurt you, remember that Jesus will vindicate you. Here's another anchor point here in our letter. Amidst the chaos around you, know that Jesus will protect you. We read, since you have kept my commandment to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test those who live on the earth. I am coming soon. So what's Jesus talking about here? It says something future, I will keep. It's about something limited, an hour of trial, and something that affects, it says, the whole world. And then this hour of trial is coming on those who live on the earth. Those who live on the earth is this phrase repeated again and again throughout Revelation, probably a dozen times or more, and always refers to people who are against God and who persecute believers. In other words, this is about end times. Throughout Revelation, we see God bringing various judgments on the world. And each time he does so, it's always on unbelievers. Believers are immune to the judgment that God brings. So Jesus isn't promising that he's going to protect them from all harm, because some of the harm they're going to experience is from persecution. And even throughout Revelation, we find believers being martyred. Revelation talks about this all the time. But Jesus says, I'm going to keep you from the judgment that I bring on the world. I guess it's similar to the plagues back in Egypt. Remember, way back in the second book of the Bible, that the people of God were under, in slavery, and God brings the 10 plagues of Egypt, and he brings them on the Egyptians, but the people of God never experienced the plagues. They did experience hardship from the Pharaoh, but they never experienced the judgment of God. I think that's what's happening here in Revelation. Jesus is saying, I will protect you from anything I bring on the people around in a day to come. Because ultimately the big message of Revelation is Jesus wins. And so when you read it, you don't need to be afraid. It's meant to give you confidence that Jesus wins and Jesus will protect his community, his people. So make sure you're aligned with Jesus. Perhaps you need to know that there are limits to what you experience. Perhaps you need to hear again that amidst the chaos around you, Jesus will protect you. And what helps you get through those difficulties is this fifth and final anchor point, that you have citizenship in an unshakable, permanent city to come. Jesus says, I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one can take your crown. To him who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will he leave it. Remember, these believers have been shaken by earthquakes. They've been on the move constantly, lacking permanence. Jesus speaks of a new city where they will be pillars in this temple. It's an image of stability. It's an image of permanence. Pillars, just think about it. It's a great metaphor to use. After all, the most severe earthquakes in this area, it was the huge stone temple pillars that were the ones standing, virtually the only structures still intact after those earthquakes. And these people would look around their city after the earthquake and they would see these pillars still standing. And Jesus is reminding them, when you look at those, remember that that's what I will make you in this permanent, eternal city to come. Maybe your home will be destroyed. Maybe your possessions will be taken from you. But whatever happens, know that there is this unshakable, immovable place for you in this future kingdom. To a people who are shaken and fragile, Jesus gives permanence. You'll never have to move, he says. You'll never have to hide. You'll never have to evacuate. You'll never have to leave, board up, pack up, pick up, or rebuild again. You're coming to an unshakable city. I love the way Jesus takes what people experience and brings new meaning into that and speaks to our very need. In addition to this, Jesus says something about the identity crisis the city was going through. Remember, this city has, 3 names already in just 60 years. Philadelphia, Neo-Caesarea, Flavia, all in honor to an emperor who betrayed his promises and made this city bankrupt. And in this very context, Jesus says, I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down from heaven from my God. I will also write on him my new name. Name, name, name. Jesus is continuing to talk about identity. I will carve out your name on these richly adorned pillars in the city. Do you hear me? I'm going to give you this sense of permanence. It's an unchanging name that will stand forever. And you will live in the city, and you will be citizens in the city, and it's an unshakable city. I will keep my promises to you forever. Perhaps this is what you need to hear today. Perhaps you've been excluded from places all around. You know so well what it's like to have the door slammed in your face. And you have that longing to settle down. Jesus says, I have a place for you. It's a place that is desired by many, to use Auckland's very expensive tagline. This is the ultimate place desired by many. You have a permanent, unshakable place desired by many. And then he finishes with this letter. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. See, Jesus knows you. He knows what you're facing. He knows the promises and the hope you need right now. He knows you're battling for identity. He knows the doors that have been slammed in your face. He knows you have little strength left. So what do you need today from Jesus? Do you need to remind yourself who Jesus is in relation to your very situation? Don't park it at the door if it is, because that's insane. Bring it to Jesus. Allow him to speak into the very circumstances of your life right now. Perhaps you carry the hurt of something from your past. Maybe you need to remind your soul again that Jesus will vindicate you. He will stand alongside of you in a day to come. Or amidst the chaos around you, do you need the reminder that he will protect you from the judgment to come? Or perhaps the ground feels like it's constantly moving underneath you. Remember that you are a citizen of an unshakable, permanent city to come. Or perhaps you'll be facing slammed doors and you need to open your eyes to see the door Jesus has opened for you. Picture yourself walking into that door and being included by Jesus himself. Of course, you might be here today and you've never responded personally to Jesus. You might be becoming a fan of Jesus, it's just you're not really a follower of Jesus right now. But now, today is the time to say yes to Jesus. I'm going to pray, and I invite all of us to pray in the quietness of our souls in this moment. There's no magical words, but for you it might just be saying, hey, Jesus, I'm in. I want to follow you. Or it might be just saying, Jesus, here are my set of circumstances, and I've been, looking for hope and identity in somewhere else, but I want to find those in you. In the quietness of this moment, I invite you to pray and talk to Jesus about what you need. So Jesus, here we are. Some here today have never actually walked through that door into a relationship with you and been part of your new family. And yet today, there's people here that want to say yes to you. And if that's you, I just invite you. You don't have to put up your hand. You don't have to do anything. It's just between you and Jesus. So just say yes to him and walk through that door. And Jesus, there's people here today that just facing an identity crisis. They're in lives that are just shakeable. There's a lot going on. Bring hope, Jesus. May your Spirit take these promises, take these strong anchor points and allow them to, our souls to anchor to them and be stable amidst the changing seasons around us. Thank you, Jesus, that you are all we need, everything we need. Thank you that you have that door wide open to each one of us. Help us to receive that inclusion and that acceptance. In Jesus' name, amen.